Today I'm going to be doing something a little different with my mods. I'm going to MacGyver an LED mod. I'll only be using scissors, a metric number 3 Allen wrench to open the TE, a lighter, and finally a small flat-headed screwdriver. To give you an idea of what it'll look like afterwards, this is just some sample footage after I finish the install. Now for the parts that we'll be using, we'll use the Sparky PWM SMD from FocusAttack.com. Included with every Sparky is a bag of 34 Scotch locks. This will help make our install completely solderless, which is something I know a lot of people like. And additionally, we also have some harnesses that come with it. The larger harness has some quick disconnects attached to it, and the smaller harness is just some plain wires. Finally, we'll need the Seimitsu PS14KN line of buttons with the Wheela series of LEDs installed into it. I did this in my last video, and I am using the ULAS flash, but I removed the white wires. They are completely unnecessary. The only use I have for the lighter is with the screwdriver to heat it up and punch holes through the back of the Seimitsu buttons to install the Wheela LEDs. But the entire process of this installation is already covered in my last video. So if these highlights aren't enough for you to understand how to put this into your button, then go ahead and check out my last video and come back right here. I'll be using a Round 1 Mad Catz PS3 TE today. However, the system itself doesn't really matter that much, and the model of the stick really doesn't matter. Pretty much any Tournament Edition stick can use this. However, other sticks can also benefit from this guide as well. Every arcade stick that can use this guide only needs to meet 3 conditions. Firstly, it uses quick disconnects. Second, it has a common ground circuit board, which most arcade sticks that use quick disconnects do. And thirdly, it has to have a USB cable. Pretty much any stick that uses Sanwa or Seimitsu parts will be able to benefit from this guide. The Hori V series, for example, will benefit from this guide. Pretty much any custom or dual modded stick can also use this guide. But if you have any questions, just leave a comment and I'll try to get back to you on whether or not you can use that stick with this guide. Fast forward a bit past me unscrewing a bunch of hex nuts, and we have the Tournament Edition open and ready to be modded. First things first, we need to remove the quick disconnects from the buttons to remove them from the top panel. So you can generally pull these off with your fingers pretty easily. It takes a little bit of effort to do, but once you get the hang of it and use the vinyl sleeve covers to pull them out, it's not very difficult at all. After pulling off the very last of the quick disconnects, we're ready to remove the buttons from the front panel. To remove the buttons, I'm going to use my small flat-bladed screwdriver and just push in these little tabs that hold the snap-in buttons in place. I use my fingers at the same time to also push in the button since we're trying to push it out of the place that it's in. So on the other side there is one more tab. We just repeat the process. I use my thumb to push it in and the flat-bladed screwdriver to push the tab in, and with a little extra effort it pops right out. After removing the last button, we're ready to put in our new buttons. First things first, just thread the wires through the hole and push the button in through the hole. However, since these are screw-in buttons, we're going to have to use a nut with this. I just thread the wires through the hole of the nut like so. And with a little bit of effort, bring the nut up to the button and start to screw it in. If you have a little bit of trouble letting it spin freely like this, then you might have the nut on backwards. Now, it will definitely screw in, it just will take a little bit more effort, so you might as well just take the nut off and screw it back in. I'm also trying to adjust the micro switch so that the wires will basically come out all the same. I'm just kind of turning it into a position to get it the right way, but this is just kind of an optional nitpicky OCD thing that I do. Other than that, the first button is installed and ready to move on to the rest. On Mad Catz sticks, the light kick button is a little bit special. You actually have to hold the nut in place before screwing the actual button into it. This is because the metal mounting bracket from the joystick actually gets in the way of the nut screwing in all the way, so you need to hold it in place before screwing in the button like this. Now, with the buttons all installed, we are ready to connect our buttons back to the quick disconnects. Now we need to reconnect the buttons. This is the barrier strip of the TE, and in it, although it doesn't really show in the video, between the wires right here, you can see where they list a square. And what that means is those two wires, whenever connected to a button, it'll be the square button. So use this as a guide. Since square is surrounded by the black wires, we'll use the black wires to wire to the square button. Now, using this bit of information, we're going to use the pair of black wires to reconnect to the square button. Now remember, when you flip over the panel, while the square button is on top in this case, it'll actually be on the bottom when you flip the panel over. So, just remember this when reconnecting the buttons. And all you have to do is slide on the quick disconnects. Reconnecting all of the wires, your stick is now ready to be played on. However, none of your LEDs will actually work. So we're going to have to do a little bit of wiring. And at this point, the wiring looks like a mess, and it's only going to go downhill from here. Just a quick side note, I cut the little zip tie that was holding all the wires together just to make my life a bit easier while wiring this. It won't make anything cleaner, but the wires won't be all tied up together, basically. Now for the installation of the larger harness onto the Sparky. You'll notice that you can actually plug this in two ways. However, there's only one correct way to do this. As you can see, it fits on backwards just fine, but you don't want to wire it up this way, otherwise it will not work at all. So, instead, make sure that the pair of pink wires is going to the one punch. Basically, I would call this the up top. This direction is the direction that you want to plug it in. Just look for the little 1P by the side of the harness and make sure that these pink wires are the two that are up top. So just as a quick reminder, remember that our square button is our first punch button. So this will go to the pink wires because it is our first punch. Now we go back to the barrier strip, and you notice how there are two wires. We only want to connect to the top one. This is our signal wire. The bottom one, the ground wire, shouldn't be connected to. Now, if you're not sure of which wire is the signal and which one is the ground, because there will always be a signal and a ground wire connected to each button, then you can take a guess. And if you connect to the ground wire, the light will just always be on. So then you know to switch it. Then I take the wire that I followed up as the signal wire from the barrier strip, and I just plug it into the pink male terminal. After that, I just use the vinyl sleeve that's already on it to slide over it and to hold them together, as well as insulate the two. And then I just pop on the female side of the quick disconnect back onto the button as normal. Once I get it on there and into place, I just slide the vinyl sleeve back onto it. Now, a trick exclusive to the Mad Catz Tournament Edition is to use the barrier strip itself and just unplug the quick disconnect from the barrier strip, slide the vinyl sleeve over the pink wire there, and then use the female quick disconnect on the barrier strip. It makes wiring just a little bit easier so you don't have to constantly hunt for signal wires. Now on the opposite side of the harness, there is a plain wire that doesn't have a quick disconnect to it but is also pink. We're going to connect this to the black wire of the Wheela LED of the first punch button. To do this, we're going to utilize the Scotch locks that were included. These can connect wires together without any sort of need to solder, and they can be crimped shut with your fingers. Now, I just snip off the little bit of exposed wire on the black wire. This really isn't required, and in a bit I just kind of got lazy and didn't do this anyways. So, to work the Scotch lock, you simply slide in both of the wires. The bigger wire from the pink wire is a little bit tougher to do than the black wire just because it's thicker. Use the fact that it's transparent in the back to make sure that your wires are securely all the way through before crimping the button closed. So, to crimp the button, you just use your fingers. It is honestly a little bit hard, especially with the thick pink wire. After you feel a small pop, just give it a tug and make sure that everything is securely in place. This also means that it's connected. Now do this process that we did with the two pink wires with the rest of the punches and the kicks as well. Now we're going to connect this smaller harness. It will be on the bottom of the PCB. It has 6 pins, but it's actually missing one. So if you look at your harness, you'll see there are 2 pins on one side, 3 pins on the other. So just connect it up the appropriate way. It can be slid on backwards, but it should be pretty apparent which way is the right way. Now be sure to separate out the 3 longer colored red, green, and blue wires from the rest, and don't mix up the long red wire with the short red wire. The longer red wire will be connected directly to our LEDs. In fact, it'll be the red wire of our LEDs. So, we will be using Scotch locks to connect these. However, we need to connect all of these together in a daisy chain, so I'm saving just a little bit of wire to connect to the next Scotch lock. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So, after getting a Scotch lock, I'm going to thread these 2 wires into the Scotch lock, but I'm also going to take the third smaller wire that I cut off of the Wheela, and I'm going to be connecting them all together. Now I'm going to take the large wire from the harness, the wire from the Wheela LED, and the small piece of wire that I cut off from it, and I'm going to connect all 3 in a single Scotch lock, and then, of course, pop it down with my fingers. Now, using this wire that's sticking out, you're going to want to attach it to the next Scotch lock in the line. In fact, you can connect multiple red wires, and I recommend this because it will save on Scotch locks as you do this. It's interesting to note how an actual Scotch lock works. When you push the button down, essentially metal teeth will bite into the wire, and when it bites into the wire, that means that anything's connected to the wire is also connected to the metal teeth. Now, whenever that happens, the wire won't move because it's bitten by metal teeth, but it's also connected to any other wires that are also bitten by these metal teeth. So, it makes it for an easier way to connect wires together, as opposed to the traditional soldering. After a little bit of manipulation on my part, I finally managed to struggle and get in enough wires before popping down the Scotch lock. You always want to remember having a wire going out from your Scotch lock, as well as the last wire in the chain being in your Scotch lock. Additionally, you want to connect more of your red wires from the Wheela LED boards. At this point, you can see I have a wire ready to pop onto my next set of Scotch lock wires. After a few more minutes of manipulation, I was able to get the wire from the last Scotch lock, as well as all of the remaining red wires into this single Scotch lock. Because it's the final Scotch lock in the chain, I don't need any more Scotch locks, so I don't need a wire going out. Because of this, I was only using 3 Scotch locks, which saved me a lot of Scotch locks to be able to use later, in case if I ever do make any mistakes. Once you understand this connection process, it's identical for both the blue and green sets of wires. Now, there is a simple fix in case if you ever miss a wire in your daisy chain and you don't have a wire going out to go to the next daisy chain. Simply take one of the wires connected in the last Scotch lock and use the 2 wires that you've just created along with whatever wires that you forgot to put in the chain. So, with these 3 wires, I'm going to slip a Scotch lock over these, and I'll just crimp them with my fingers once I manage to get all 3 in. This trick can also be applied if you happen to have a wire that falls out of a Scotch lock. Just clip a wire and use this trick, and you should be good. This is why you try to save Scotch locks, for tricks like these when you mess up. Once you're finished with the red, green, and blue sets of wires, you're ready to move on to the short red and black wires. Now, these are power and ground. So to access the power and ground of the main PCB, we're going to tap into the USB cable. Now, here I cut the USB cord a bit far away from the main PCB. The reason why you want to do this is so that whenever you're cutting off the insulation like this, if you make an accidental cut, you won't cut it so close that you can't crimp on a Scotch lock anymore. If you cut too close, you may have to solder to repair the damage, so be sure to give it just a little bit of length to work with. So after giving a light cut with my scissors and manipulating it with my fingers a bit, I'm finally able to cut off the outer insulation without damaging any of the inside wires. I kind of twist and pull, and then I finally get the insulation off of it. Inside lie our 4 wires, 2 of which to access the power and the ground. The other 2 are data wires that we're going to have to reconnect using a Scotch lock. I also did clip and remove this zip tie. I also repeat the process on the other side of the USB cable that I cut. Since I didn't strip enough insulation off of the USB cable to properly crimp into a Scotch lock, I just wrestled with it and took off a little bit more. Now I'm just going to use a Scotch lock to reconnect the data wires. First up is the set of green wires. Then I use a little trick with my scissors to help pop the button down. It's easier on the hands, and you can use pliers to do this as well. It's just I'm only going to use 4 tools to do this throughout. And then I just do the same process with the other data wires, the white data minus wires, and again I just use my little scissor trick. And there you have it. Then, to tap into the power of the USB cable for the LEDs and the Sparky to run, I just slide in the 2 red wires from the USB cable along with the short red wire from the harness of the Sparky. And then use your fingers or scissors or pliers or whatever you're going to use and close the Scotch lock up. Then repeat this process with the black USB wires and the short black USB cable from the same harness right next to the shorter red wire. With that, we're done, So you can try to push your wires in and around and just try to get the shell back on top so nobody ever has to look at it ever again. And thus the wiry mess that we have made, we just calmly sweep it under the panel. As long as you can tighten those hex nuts on top of it, you should be good. After twisting on the last of the hex nuts and securing it in place, we are ready for a test run. The awesome thing about the Sparky is that it uses all colors in the RGB spectrum, so that whenever you hit a throw or a focus attack or taunt, that the buttons will change their colors, which is a really nice touch. Additionally, One Punch and EX, Super, and all 4 punches will also change colors to different colors. And now we move on to troubleshooting. If a button is no longer working, check the male quick disconnect of the button that is connected to the Sparky. Sometimes I notice they come out a little bit too easily, so just reconnect them and give them that vinyl sleeving. If it really becomes an annoyance, you could use hot glue or something to kind of hold them in place. If everything's wired up properly, but some of your colors don't light up, say a bunch of the blues don't light up, then you might need to check the connection with a Scotch lock and make sure that it's fully pressed down all the way. Again, you might have to employ pliers to do this. If it's a problem in a specific button, then you might want to check the specific black wire to that button. And you also want to make sure that that button is working, as in it's actually still registering with the system. Otherwise, it might have become unplugged with its male quick disconnect. If your stick no longer works, the only possible problem that could go wrong with this mod is that the USB wire is just not properly connected. Make sure that all of your Scotch locks are connected firmly to the stick, and if the LEDs are lighting up, but the stick is still not being recognized by the system, then it's likely a problem with your data wires. If neither of them work, then the problem also will lie in your power wires.